Hi everyone, we've made it into double figures. This is daily critique number 10, and today I'm going to be discussing 5 images by Simon Atkinson. They're all of Scotland, and Simon is a very talented photographer, so some really nice photos to go through here. And this video is focused on some specific aspects of shooting panoramas, both compositionally as well as looking at the different kinds of projections you might choose when it comes to stitching images together. So let's get going. So here are 5 pretty fantastic images, it has to be said, all of Scotland, and I'm going to do a mixture of nitpicking and offering some general views here on these, aside from discussing the panoramas, because obviously the standard here is very high. So in Photoshop, let's first look at this one of Sullivan, which is up in the northwest of Scotland. I've been up here a few times myself, and it's quite a walk in, but well worth it for these views. There's a lot of contrast naturally in this scene, and I think Simon's handled the editing of this really well. My general suggestion for editing scenes like this is to keep the highlights as bright as possible, because that allows you to open up the shadows, because there's no direct sunlight falling on the mountain here. So I think that tonal balance is pretty good. Maybe it's a little left heavy. Everything compositionally is sort of centered around this frame, so I'd perhaps just leave a bit more room on the left hand side and shoot it in a more panoramic format, but otherwise I think this is really nice. Maybe there's just a hint here of an artifact of some color clipping. You can just see a subtle arc there, so it might be possible to remove that, but getting pretty picky there. And here we've got a shot of Glen Etive. I'm not quite sure why it was showing me a noisy version there. Something up with my computer maybe, but lovely scene here. Not really much to criticize, because you obviously have that strong central valley idea, nicely balanced on either side. I'd just say maybe that the shadow area in the bottom left slightly draws the eye, so I'd possibly open up those shadows in that area, but no complaints here. Very nice image indeed. Now onto this shot of Leach from Ben A. This is in the Torridon area of Scotland. Nice portrait view. I think this is the first summit that you get up when you're sort of doing Route 1 up Ben A, and this is the view you get pretty much immediately, looking over the ridge, which you can actually continue on along down here. I would only really say here that the foreground, whilst it has beautiful texture and it's perfectly shot, great depth of field here, and it's detailed all the way through, I'd just say that there's no particular structure here. It's quite linear, doesn't particularly interest me. So it's nice from a depth perspective, but I'm not sure that it really adds much to the scene. And my personal preference is for slightly more 4:5 ratio when I'm working in portrait. So we can just try a bit of a crop here, just to demonstrate, because I'd probably lose a bit of this foreground. Well, I don't know, actually, maybe not. See, I'm doing this on the fly, and I'm looking with this bottom edge here, where's it actually going to fit? Well, you don't want that shadow creeping in the bottom edge, so it needs to be here. And if you do that, I think it just becomes a little bit too square, and the edge doesn't fit between the two either. So maybe in this case I would leave it relatively uncropped. But very, very nice image, and I'd only look for something slightly different in the foreground, but maybe there was no obvious option there. Okay, now on to this view again of Ben A. So the previous shot would have been taken just off to the left here, I think. It's spectacular. The color palette is lovely. You've got a wide mountain vista. You can count so many mountains here and name so many of them, actually, if you know the area. So it's pretty exciting in that respect. But I would say that compositionally, this central mass here smack bang in the middle of the image. It's a bit of a dead zone. There's very little going on there, and particularly in that large area of snow in the middle here. So it's kind of unfortunate to have this banana-like framing of the mountain opposite that comes with shooting in this ultra wide angle way, because this is it's at least 180 degrees of view, if not slightly more. So it's really an incredibly wide view, and you will regularly get this banana effect if you shoot that wide. But that has the effect of framing whatever's in the middle, and in this case I'm not sure that the center is that interesting. The color palette is nice. The mountains certainly look very dramatic, but on that end this is more what the mountains should look like, I think. Or in fact the mountains themselves should look like this. So this is what happens if you stitch the images that Simon provided with a spherical projection, and a spherical projection will maintain the scale and proportions of things in the center very accurately. At the top and bottom it will start to vertically compress and stretch things a little bit, although in terms of the sort of height, if that makes sense, it's perfectly accurate, the spherical projection. The cylindrical projection, which is this one, does something between the two. So you can see the foreground actually looks more natural and less squashed in this projection, but it actually starts to stretch the scene quite a lot. And what Simon has done, I think, is taken that cylindrical projection and then stretched it further. And to somebody who knows this area very well, these mountains have become offensively steep to me. So you can just you can see the difference there between what they would actually be like with the spherical projection and what they're like in Simon's edit. Now, that's very much personal choice, but I think you're starting to manipulate the reality of what the mountains are, regardless of the reasons that you've chosen to do that. So from an aesthetic perspective, sure, stretching mountains makes everything more dramatic, and it makes your aspect ratio more social media friendly, certainly, than something like this. But personally, I'd prefer my mountains as they were intended. But that said, very successful aesthetically. Technically, it's perfect. I went through the files, very well exposed, sharp front to back, and just an enormous resolution is possible with this. You could print it the size of a wall, so pretty impressive on that end too. Finally, this shot of Ben Allegan. I've been up here many times because it's the easiest mountain to get up in Torridon. It's just 1,000 meters straight up from the road, and what a spectacular morning to photograph from the summit of Tomnagruga. This one is taken on. To have the sun coming up like this with heavy clouds overhead is pretty much the dream sunrise or sunset scenario, because the clouds overhead will quieten down the fill light that a blue sky would provide. So you get this really rich pinky light and plenty of contrast, so it makes for pretty spectacular shooting conditions. To add to that, we've got some lovely sweeping lines here from the mountain. And all these diagonals feed in nicely. You've got a nice view down the valley there, and incidentally, that's Ben A, where the previous shot was taken. So it all fits together very nicely indeed. I would say that there could be a little bit more space on both sides of the image. So I've actually got a shot that I took here showing you, how you could pan round there to the right. So a bit more room on that right hand side would be nice. I think the slope from this exact position just keeps going up, so possibly Simon has chosen to leave that out to avoid the cliff on the right breaking the horizon, but it would be possibly to get higher, either by taking a shot effectively like I did, or by just changing your position completely, because with the sun there, it's just the most noticeable focal point in the image. It doesn't matter how beautiful this mountain is and how well lit it is. If you put your subject right on the edge of the frame like that, I think that's a bit of a problem, and it does need more breathing space. And equally with this curve here, again, that becomes a bit of a subject, and I'd love a little bit more space than we've got here. So A couple of minor points there on the composition. Obviously, to anybody else, this is just a spectacular shot, but I would like to see a bit more space on the right in particular. In terms of the edit, very nicely handled. I had a look at the DNG that Simon sent over, and I'd possibly take a little bit of the magenta out of this, but again, that's personal taste, and the contrast and exposure and everything are handled very well. You could do a little bit more work around the sun, just to avoid that sort of clipping effect. You can see you've got quite a harsh transition from white to a strong yellow to a sort of fairly flat orange there. So I'd work either with the raw file or effectively with a paintbrush just to soften that area naturally, because that's to do with the sensor saturation and so on. And I'd want to soften that up because I think it would look more realistic. And being really picky, since the sun is such a strong focal point, cleaning up these little flares would help as well. But really fantastic set of images there from Simon. So thank you very much for sending those in.